At 17, I fell in love with the boy my family would have forbidden me to even look at. For months, I climbed out my bedroom window just to see him. And to this day, when people ask me when my life truly began, I tell them it started the night I heard his truck slow down beneath my window. Welcome back. Tonight, I want to tell you a story I have carried in my heart for most of my life. It is not a story about scandal for the sake of scandal. It is a story about being young, frightened, stubborn, and completely, helplessly in love. It is about the summer I learned that one secret can change the direction of an entire life. My name is Ruth Harper, and when this began, I was 17 years old, living in a white clapboard house on the edge of a small Georgia town where everybody knew your parents before they knew you. My father was a deacon. My mother taught Sunday school. My brothers were loud, proud, and forever convinced that their job on earth was to protect me from every bad choice a girl could make. In our house, girls did not stay out after dark, did not argue with their fathers, and certainly did not meet boys in secret. Back then, my life was made of routines so steady they felt carved in stone. I woke before sunrise, helped my mother shell peas or fold laundry, tied my hair back with a ribbon she liked, and walked into town with my head lowered just enough to look respectful. Even my dreams felt supervised. I was expected to finish school, maybe help at the church office, and marry somebody respectable with polished shoes and a kind handshake. Then, one July afternoon, I met Thomas Reed. The first thing I noticed was not his face. It was the way he listened. I had gone with my friend June to pick up thread from Morrow's General Store, and the ceiling fan was doing little more than moving hot air in circles. June was talking too loudly, like she always did, and I was waiting by the flour sacks when a glass bottle rolled off a shelf near my feet. Before I could bend down, a hand caught it mid-drop. "Careful," a voice said. "That would have shattered all over your shoes." I looked up, and there he was. Tall, sun-warmed skin, dark hair falling over his forehead, grease at the edge of one wrist like he'd come straight from work. He was not dressed like the boys my mother approved of. His sleeves were rolled, his collar open, and there was something in his eyes that looked amused without being arrogant. I thanked him, quiet as ever. He smiled like my silence didn't make him nervous. "You're Reverend Harper's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. I should have felt offended that he recognized me that way, as if I belonged to my father's name before my own. Instead, I was startled that he knew who I was at all. "Yes," I said. "I'm Thomas. I help Mr. Morrow with deliveries." June came bouncing back before I could say another word, and that might have been the end of it. But as we walked home, she nudged me so hard I nearly dropped the paper bag in my arms. "He was looking at you," she whispered. I told her not to be ridiculous. I said it too fast. 2 days later, I saw him again by the feed store. A week after that, outside the post office. Then near the creek road. Each time he spoke to me as if we were already in the middle of a conversation life had interrupted. He never pushed too hard. He just asked simple things. How was my mother feeling after her headaches? Did I still like books more than people? Why did I always look like I had one foot in the world and one foot halfway out of it? No boy had ever spoken to me like that. Not to impress me, not to flatter me, to know me. The first time he asked to walk with me, I said no. The second time, I said I couldn't. The third time, he smiled and said, "Then I'll keep asking until your courage catches up to your heart." I remember standing there with my pulse in my throat, unable to breathe properly, because the terrible thing was that he was right. My courage was the only thing lagging behind. A week later, I said yes. I did not say it proudly. I said it with my eyes on the ground and my hands twisting the strap of my handbag so tightly my knuckles hurt. Thomas had caught up with me by the road lined with pecan trees, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the cicadas. "Just to the corner," I told him. "No farther." "I'll take what I can get," he said. That was how it started. Small, careful. A walk to the corner became a walk to the end of the road, A conversation by the creek became 10 conversations. Then, one evening, he told me there was a hill outside town where you could see the whole sky open up after sunset, and I found myself lying to my mother for the very first time. I told her June needed help with sewing. Instead, I changed my shoes, slipped out with my cardigan folded over my arm, and met Thomas by the old sycamore. That hill became ours. We sat on an old blanket in the fading light, while fields stretched around us in every direction, and the air smelled like warm grass and clay. Thomas talked about leaving town one day and opening his own garage. He had lost his father young and started working before most boys learned responsibility. He did not speak with pity about his life. He spoke like a man who had already decided hardship would never own him. I told him things I had never admitted aloud, that sometimes I felt invisible in my own home, that my brothers were praised for being bold while I was praised for being obedient, that I had dreams bigger than the rooms I lived in, and yet I was ashamed of them. He listened the same way he had in the store that first day, as if every word mattered. "Ruth," he said one night, turning toward me while the sky blushed purple, "there is a whole person inside you that nobody around here has met yet." I laughed because it felt too dangerous to believe him. But then he reached for my hand. I still remember how careful he was. He did not grab. He did not assume. His fingers touched mine as if asking permission. When I did not pull away, he laced them with mine and held on. That was the first time I understood that tenderness could be more powerful than force. Our meetings became the secret rhythm of my life. I learned which floorboard near my bedroom door creaked and which one did not. I learned how long it took my father to start snoring after the 10 o'clock news. I learned how to tie a sheet to the windowsill, gather my skirt in one hand, and climb down with my heart hammering like a trapped bird. Thomas would be waiting in the dark below, one hand ready in case I slipped, his truck parked far enough away that nobody would hear it. Sometimes we drove to the county fairgrounds after everyone had gone home. Sometimes we sat by the river and shared a bottle of orange soda. Once, in August, a storm came in so suddenly the rain drenched us before we could run for cover. We ended up laughing under the awning of a closed bait shop, soaked through, my hair plastered to my cheeks, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. "You know," he said, brushing rain from my face, "most girls would have gone home by now." "Most girls aren't climbing out windows to see you," I answered. He stared at me like I had given him something precious. Then he kissed me. My whole body went still. Not because I disliked it, but because I felt every fear and every hope collide at once. His hand cupped my face, warm and steady, and the world narrowed until there was only rain, breath, and the impossible fact that I was no longer just Reverend Harper's careful daughter. I was a girl, being loved. When I got home that night, I stood in front of my mirror and touched my mouth like it belonged to someone newly awakened. Of course, secrets never stay small forever. My younger brother Caleb was the first to suspect something. He noticed I had begun humming while folding towels. He noticed I spent too long brushing my hair. He noticed I smiled at nothing. Brothers notice joy the way dogs notice thunder. They do not always understand it, but they sense a change in the air. One Sunday after church, he asked, "Why do you keep looking toward the back row?" I said I wasn't. He grinned. "You are, and if Daddy catches who you're looking for, you're dead." I should have been scared. Instead, I felt heat rise in my cheeks because Thomas was there, standing beside the doorway, pretending to study the bulletin while waiting for one glance from me. That glance was all it took. We were in too deep now. The trouble began in September. By then, Thomas and I had been meeting in secret for nearly 3 months, and secrecy had done what secrecy always does. It made everything feel larger. Every smile meant more. Every touch carried danger. Every goodbye felt like a promise and a wound at the same time. Then my father heard Thomas Reed's name at the supper table. It was innocent at first. My oldest brother mentioned that Thomas had fixed the truck for the Callaway farm. My mother said she had heard he was a hard-working boy. But my father's expression changed in that quiet way that meant a storm had entered the room. "Reed?" he said. "The mechanic's son?" My brother nodded. Father kept eating, but there was a new hardness in his jaw. "That family keeps to itself. Too rough around the edges." Nobody answered. In our house, silence was agreement. I could barely swallow my food. That night I told Thomas what had happened. We were sitting in his truck near Miller's Pond, the windows cracked open to let in the smell of water and pine. "He doesn't even know you," I said. Thomas rested his hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield. "Men like your father don't need to know me to decide what I'm worth." I hated that he said it without bitterness, as if he had met that kind of judgment so often it no longer surprised him. "He's wrong," I whispered. Thomas turned to me then, and the softness in his face nearly broke my heart. "Maybe, but if this keeps going, he'll make you choose." I said the brave thing then, because I was young and believed love alone could defeat the world. "Then I'll choose." He did not smile. "Don't say that lightly, Ruth. Choosing me may cost you more than late-night meetings and a few lies." He was right, though I did not yet understand how much a family can punish a daughter for becoming her own person. 2 weeks later, my mother found mud on the hem of my nightgown. She held it up in the morning light while I stood at the foot of my bed, still dizzy from too little sleep. "Would you like to explain this?" I told her I had spilled flower pots on the porch. It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. She sat down heavily on the edge of my bed and looked older than she had the night before. "Ruth," she said softly, "your father is not a cruel man, but he is a proud one. Do not bring shame into this house." That one shame settled on my shoulders like wet cloth. I wanted to ask her whether loving somebody decent but disapproved of was shameful. I wanted to ask why my brothers could roam wherever they pleased, while I was expected to protect a family reputation that did not seem to protect me back. But I had spent my whole life swallowing questions. So I said nothing. The next Saturday, Thomas and I met at the autumn fair on the edge of the next county, thinking we would be safe where nobody knew us. We walked beneath strings of yellow bulbs, ate hot roasted peanuts from a paper cone, and listened to distant music from the Ferris wheel. For one glorious hour, we were just a boy and a girl in love. Then I heard my name. Not from Thomas, from Aunt Evelyn. She was standing near the ticket booth with 2 women from our church, staring at me as if I had climbed onto the preacher's pulpit in a red dress. Her mouth fell open. Thomas's hand tightened around mine. I knew then that by Sunday afternoon the entire town would know. The sermon the next morning was about temptation. My father did not look at me once during lunch. That evening, he called me into the parlor and shut the door. He asked me one question. "Are you seeing that boy?" I said yes. He asked if he had touched me. My face burned so hot I thought I might faint. When I did not answer quickly enough, he stood up so fast the chair scraped hard across the floor. "You will not see him again," he said. "Do you understand me?" I told him I loved him. I had never said those words aloud before, not even to Thomas. My father stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. "You are too young to know what love is," he said. Maybe I was, but I knew what it felt like to be alive when Thomas smiled at me. And I knew what it felt like to go cold when my father tried to crush that feeling with the weight of his authority. He grounded me for a month. No walks into town alone, no visits except church. My bedroom window was nailed shut the next day. That should have ended our story. It did not. When a girl has been taught obedience her whole life, the first act of defiance feels like stepping off a cliff. But once you survive the fall, you discover there is another life beneath the one you were handed. My mother thought nailing the window shut would keep me inside. She did not know that my brother Caleb, for all his teasing, had a soft heart. 3 nights after my punishment began, he slipped into my room carrying a small screwdriver. "If Daddy asks, I was never here," he muttered. I stared at him. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Because I've seen your face when that fellow's around, and I've seen your face when he isn't. I may be stupid, but not that stupid." He loosened the screws just enough that the frame could be opened and closed again without anyone noticing. "You'll owe me for life," he said. I nearly cried. That night I climbed out more carefully than ever, my hands shaking, my breath shallow. Thomas was there beneath the pecan tree, waiting in the moonlight like he had been carved from patience itself. When he saw me, the relief on his face was so raw that I ran to him before I could stop myself. "I thought they'd keep you locked away till Christmas," he said into my hair. "They tried." We drove farther than usual that night, past the county line, all the way to a roadside diner where nobody knew my name. I drank coffee for the first time because he said it made him feel grown, and I hated the taste, but loved the feeling of doing something forbidden with him. We sat in a red vinyl booth until nearly dawn, talking about everything we had no right to plan. A rented house with peeling paint but a porch swing. A dog. His garage with my name on the office books, because he said I was the only person he trusted to keep him organized. Children, maybe. Travel, if money ever allowed it. A life that belonged to us and not to the rules of anybody else's house. A week later, he asked me to marry him. It was not grand. There was no ring yet, no kneeling in a field at sunset, no audience to gasp and clap. We were sitting by the river wrapped in one blanket because October had turned cold, and he simply said, "I don't want to spend my whole life borrowing hours with you. I want the whole thing. Will you marry me when you're ready?" I looked at him, at this man who had never mocked my fears, never rushed my heart, never treated me like something fragile to be managed. And I said yes so quickly we both laughed. Then reality arrived. My father found the note in my coat pocket 3 days later. Thomas had written only 6 words. "Sunday night, Bridge Road, wear your blue sweater." That note exploded my house. Father shouted until the veins stood in his neck. My mother cried. My oldest brother swore he'd break Thomas's jaw if he came near me again. Even Caleb, my secret ally, kept his head down and said nothing. Because some storms are too big for a younger son to stand against. My father told me if I left that house for Thomas, I should not expect to come back. I wish I could tell you I answered with perfect courage. I did not. I was terrified. I loved my family, even in their harshness. I loved my room, my mother folding sheets in the hallway, the smell of biscuits in the morning, the familiar shape of my life. Leaving felt like tearing my own skin. So I asked Thomas for time. He gave it. That was one of the reasons I knew he was the man for me. He did not punish me for fear. He did not accuse me of loving him less. He said, "I'd rather wait for your whole heart than drag half of it into a future you're not ready for." Then, in early November, something happened that changed my father before any argument ever could. He collapsed in the church parking lot after evening service. It was Thomas who lifted him. Thomas had been nearby, returning a borrowed tire iron to one of the ushers. He ran before my brothers did. He knelt on cold pavement in his good shirt, checked my father's breathing, barked instructions at everybody standing frozen, and drove us to the hospital, because he knew waiting for the ambulance could cost precious minutes. My father survived. It was exhaustion and a heart episode, not the end. But I sat in that hospital corridor all night, watching the man my father despised speak calmly to nurses, fetch my mother coffee, and pay for a prescription when my brother realized he had left his wallet at home. No speeches, no boasting, just goodness. And for the first time, my family had to look directly at it. My father did not become gentle overnight. Life is rarely transformed by one dramatic moment, the way young people hope it will be. But something in him shifted after the hospital. He stopped calling Thomas that boy and started calling him Reed. In our family, that counted as progress. A week later, Thomas came to the house in a pressed shirt and stood on our porch holding a hat in both hands. I was certain my father would send him away before he crossed the threshold. Instead, he invited him into the parlor. Those 30 minutes felt longer than an entire season. My mother sat with her hands folded tight in her lap. My brothers hovered nearby, pretending not to listen. I stood in the hallway with my pulse pounding in my ears. At last, my father opened the door and said, "Ruth, come in." Thomas looked pale but steady. My father looked tired in a way I had never seen before, as though pride itself had worn him down. "Mr. Reed has asked for permission to court you properly," he said. Permission. It was not exactly the freedom I had imagined in my boldest dreams, but it was a doorway, and after months of sneaking through windows, a doorway felt holy. I said yes. Those next months were the happiest of my young life. Thomas came to supper on Sundays. My mother discovered he liked peach cobbler and started setting aside the corner piece for him. Caleb acted as though he had always supported the match and demanded credit for its success. Even my oldest brother, who had once threatened violence, grudgingly admitted Thomas knew his way around an engine better than anyone in 3 counties. In spring, Thomas gave me a ring so modest I could have hidden it under my thumbnail. To me, it looked brighter than any diamond in a storefront window. We married that June in our church, with white lilies at the altar and summer heat pressing against the stained glass. I wore a gown my mother and I stitched together at the kitchen table. Thomas looked at me as if the whole building had gone dim except for where I stood. When the preacher pronounced us husband and wife, my father shook Thomas's hand for a long moment, and there were tears in my mother's eyes. I was still only 18. People said we were too young. Some said passion burns fast and fades faster. Some quietly waited for us to fail so they could call our love a lesson. But they were wrong. Thomas and I built our life piece by piece, the same way honest people build anything lasting. We rented a little house with cracked steps. The porch leaned. The roof complained in the rain. We were poor enough to count coins and rich enough to laugh while doing it. He opened his garage 5 years later. I kept the books exactly as he had once imagined in that diner booth. We had 2 daughters and a son. We fought sometimes, over money, over time, over the ordinary pressures that visit every marriage. But never once did I doubt that I had chosen the right man. He died 12 years ago. Even now, saying that still feels strange. Love can stay so present in a room that death seems at times like an administrative error. I still reach for him in stories. I still turn to tell him when the roses bloom early. I still hear his laugh when I pass an old truck with one headlight out. And maybe that is why I wanted to tell you this tonight. When people see an older woman, they often imagine she has become only practical things: widow, mother, grandmother, neighbor, church member. They forget she was once a girl with a racing heart and dirt on the hem of her nightgown from climbing out a window to meet the person who changed everything. But I remember her. I remember the terror and the thrill, the lies that tasted bitter in my mouth, the moonlight on Thomas's shoulders, the rain-soaked kiss outside the bait shop, the note in my pocket, the hospital corridor, the porch where he finally asked for me in daylight. If you are young and listening, maybe love feels impossible because somebody powerful is telling you who you are allowed to become. Listen to me carefully. A loving life cannot be built on fear alone. And if you are older and listening, maybe you think your most alive self is gone. She is not gone. She lives inside every memory that still makes your pulse soften. My life did not begin the day I married Thomas. It began the night I chose to trust the truth of my own heart. And after all these years, that still feels like the bravest thing I ever did.